Just before we dive into the main podcast, a very quick request from me. We are obviously a new podcast and your support is greatly appreciated. If you could possibly like, follow, subscribe the podcast on whatever platform you're watching or listening to us on, it would be hugely appreciated. And I will be forever in your debt. Now, on with the pod. Hello and welcome back to the Private Client Podcast. For those tuning in for the first time, I'm Charlie Chami, an independent financial advisor and director at Glams IFA and co-founder of the Private Client Network. We're on a mission to bring together different private client professionals so we can all increase our knowledge, improve the service to our clients, and grow our respective businesses. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to the wonderful Sarah Bolt, Senior Associate at national law firm Irwin Mitchell. After studying criminal law and justice at Birmingham University, Sarah's worked in a number of top law firms, including Eversheds, Osborne Clarke, Hugh James, Freeths, and now Irwin Mitchell. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me, Charlie.
So, what is a private client solicitor?
Oh, wow, weird. That's going right into the deep end. So, I suppose it's different for different people. Because I work in litigation, my side is basically helping private individuals in any element of an inheritance dispute. And that's the fancy word they give it in law is contentious probate. But that can include concerns that people have in terms of lifetime gifts or actions by people with their mums, dads. There's a whole lot of work that goes on around elder and financial abuse at the moment that also falls into the same package. So I think it's any dispute that comes up in the private life of an individual with a particular focus on inheritance matters. So that kind of catches it all. But on the flip side, we do work and other people specialise in preparing wills, preparing lasting power of attorneys, helping people look at how they would manage their finances, mitigate inheritance tax, things like that. So it covers a whole mixed bag, really.
So contentious. So is it always, are we talking always disgruntled inheritors or maybe non-inheritors that have been written out of a will or something? Is that who your clients are?
A lot. It depends really. So a lot of the work that comes through actually comes from people that I've either lost out on an inheritance or believe they should be given more. And that would cover whether they're challenging a will on the basis that their mum, dad, sister, brother, whoever it is, lost capacity, whether they were influenced. That happens to come up quite a lot. Or whether or not they want more, whether they've been cut out or whether they've been less than they thought they would do or need. So there's a whole mixed bag in there. But then you've got all these issues that come off whether an executor or administrator is acted properly, whether there were lifetime gifts that were made essentially wrongly, or whether they were made not for the benefit of the person that made them. The whole kind of mix, it covers quite a lot when you get into it. So it's any dispute really, whether you get into the estate administration, trust administration, and that can include will disputes and challenges. But the biggest ones we get at the moment tend to be from disgruntled beneficiaries.
It's interesting. Before I started the private client network, and I started doing so much networking with private client solicitors and contentious probate solicitors, I had no idea there were so many ways to contest a will. I genuinely assumed, well, it's in the will. I mean, that's it, done. They're gone now. So, but I was incorrect, it would seem.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is the trends are that this is going to get bigger and worse, I suppose, from a contentious perspective. And it's very cynical to say that's kind of our dream, is that more work will come out of it. But actually, the reality is we've got an aging population. More people are due to inherit more because like properties went up massively from like the 70s to now. So there's more to fight over. But then you've got the kind of intertwining issues of social care and how that's being funded. And off the back of all the kind of big TV programs like even EastEnders and Coronation Street have started focusing on it. That means that people are now aware, and Google does not help that. It kind of it means that people go off like a Google warrior to see what they can get. The knowledge you get sometimes is kind of half what you need to know. And it is also beneficial to involve a professional, but it tends to be a real mix, especially with blended families as well. Because a lot of people will see their mum, dad pass away, their wealth will go down the other side of the family, and they will see that they have lost out. And those are the ones that are the real kickers for a lot of the big disputes. But we tend to see that where sister, brother, mum, dad are infighting, that it's come out of something that's happened years ago, but it will just materialize in the will, which is unfortunate, really, because it really does break up families.
Yeah, imagine once it gets to you, it's in a pretty dire state in terms of sort of familial relationships. Um, but the blended family element, I didn't actually think of that. Of course, that must be a massive driver of it. So if, as you said, mum or dad, second wife, second
Yeah.
husband, and then it, your parent or your client's parent predeceases their spouse, and yeah, it would go down the other children's line. So geez, that must be a large part of it, I would have thought.
Yeah, and often there's not a lot you can do, because in that situation, and unless you can look back at what has happened and unpick it so that something's gone wrong. But typically when the first spouse passes away, they will leave their estate to their surviving spouse. Although those people usually make promises that they will look after the children, what tends to happen is that that relationship won't be as close once their parent has passed away, their wife, husband, and that they will then change even then. There are things they can do to protect against that. So you can make what's called a mutual will. So it's like you can't change it after the first spouse passes away. Or you could
Ah,
look at setting up a trust. But if you've simply got a mirror will, so they look exactly the same apart from the names, then they can change their minds as long as they can go through all the validity requirements. So they have capacity, they get two witnesses to the will. That all causes issue, and generally speaking, a lot of the inquiries we get are from stepchildren. We even get them from people it makes me giggle as I say it, but from children that ring up and say my parents are spending my inheritance. And well, so that one's a real cracker to me, because I just am like, but you have your own income, they have theirs. How on earth do you think that you're entitled to it when they're still alive? I certainly wouldn't want my parents thinking, God, I don't want to go on holiday this year because I've got to leave some money behind. So
God, we might, you know what? Some financial advisors might be partially responsible. We often end up in a situation where we're encouraging clients to spend, depending on their situation, obviously.
yeah,
Um, but it's difficult after a lifetime of saving. Lots of clients do struggle to switch to spending and enjoying. And we're usually talking about retirement, and often in
yeah.
retirement, the window to spend on yourselves for nice stuff, it is limited. So God, there might be some IFAs out there with something to answer for. But
Oh, no, not at all. I encourage my parents to spend the money that they've saved up, but I also think it's a different state of mind. And we talk about different generations, but Gen X, who are the baby boomers at the moment, they have a different way of thinking. They want to save, and as a whole, they want to put money away for a rainy day, and that might come out of rationing, for example. But and that mentality must be very difficult to change when they do retire, because it's like, yes, I've got to go off and spend it, or I want to go off and spend it. But yes, that tends to be the issue a lot of the time.
it's interesting that the war generation, they wouldn't spend for love nor money. They were properly affected by the war and rationing. It was ingrained deep. They generally saved their whole life, and they really struggled to spend. If I could generalize a little bit, baby boomers are a little bit better. They had it
Okay.
a little bit sweeter throughout life. They've often got final salary pension schemes, so they've got cash flow, guaranteed cash flow for life.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit better. I suspect the generation under them, the Gen Xers, who don't have those DB pension schemes, it'll be interesting to see where they fall on it. In family law, so with divorce, there's a big push for like mediated settlements. Is there something similar in your world where inheritors or beneficiaries can sort it in mediation prior to it getting to contentious and the courts?
I would probably say 9 times out of 10 matters settle before they go to trial. And I think the emphasis behind the court at the moment is to try and get you to mediate. There's even a recent case of Churchill where that has happened, where they have stayed proceedings in order to try and get the parties to mediate. And so from that perspective, it's fairly similar in the sense that there is a push towards that, because if you can knock it on the head at early doors, you're really saving costs all around. And it is very cynical to say, but sometimes the lawyers are the only ones that benefit in that situation, because they're the ones getting the fees. I would much prefer to see, if you can do, assessment that happened that is a sensible compromise early on, because you take years away from the stress, the cost, and it is a stress that's financial, and it can affect your physical and mental health. It's not something you want to go into lightly, but if you're fighting family members, that's got to be one of the biggest like issues or stresses there can be, because it's something that someone's not going to be able to put down. They're going to be up at night thinking about it, and it's only going to embed those trenches where they hate each other even more, not bring them together. So yeah, there is a big emphasis on settling. I would say it happens 9 times out of 10. The ones that do get through, they seem to go the whole hog, and then you're in court with, say, I think a recent trial happens over 9 days, but then you're sat there looking at your brother, sister, mum, dad's eyes as you give evidence, and that can't help. And I don't think it certainly adds to anything more than costs all round, really.
Wow. I think with those type of cases, there's got to be stuff that runs quite deep, where scores to be settled, or more, maybe more than just the financial side of it, I suspect.
Especially when, say, for example, your mum's cut you out, or cut one of children out because there's no contact. That can be bedded back from childhood, really, as to how the different relationship with the children was, or even between the sisters and brothers themselves. And that is something that comes out quite a lot in our cases. And it's often, I hear it among most of my colleagues, it's sometimes you feel a bit like a counsellor and a therapist because of the role you're taking on, and what you get to hear and be privy to, rather than the lawyer sometimes, which can be quite a different crossover.
It's funny. It's funny you use the term counselor. It's that is a phrase that comes across every conversation I have, whether it's with legal professionals or investment managers or financial advisors, anyone who deals with private individuals. That phrase is a recurring theme that comes up, and it must just be a consistent thing when you're dealing with individuals about things that are so personal. It's probably unavoidable, I think.
Yeah, and with disputes like this is you're talking about whether someone's going to get a house or a mega amount sometimes of inheritance, so it can be quite life changing. And in some cases, I've got one at the moment, the amount they were due to inherit or come through hasn't come through, but he's planning to buy a house, and he lives in a council house at the moment, so it is something that is going to impact their life, and they won't be able to put it down. And I think when they go out to look for a lawyer, they look for someone that's quite similar. So I often talk to my clients about how to approach things, but if someone wants to be quite aggressive, they'll probably go out and look for someone that is going to be quite aggressive. I would say like a shark lawyer, someone that's going to go out and do a firm hit. But if you want someone that's going to be like, I don't know, kind of more soft and be able to communicate across the differences so you don't aggravate that, people tend to go out and look for that. But it's about packaging up what you think is the best strategy for them in their case, and making sure it suits them, because they've got to put the costs up usually, and this is something they're going to be fighting with every day. And whereas for us, hopefully we can put it down.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Not, I feel like we've gone headlong into the into the tough work questions. I mean, it was supposed to start with more about you, but as we're on the work side of things and the cases, I mentioned before we were recording that I was going through your biography, and you were on the Jimmy Savile case, and I would stress not the criminal side of his life, but the probate side of things. What was that about?
Yeah, I was very lucky actually. My as I came out of qualification, I moved into work with Eversheds, and I went into financial services litigation. And I very quickly knew that wasn't for me, because it was more corporate and not working with private individuals. And so when I applied for a job, I ended up working for Osborne Clark, and I didn't realise at the time that they had a big job on, and that they were working for NatWest. And NatWest were appointed as the executor for Jimmy Savile's estate. And I think I was on the project for about 12 months before I moved on. And essentially, we were working for the executors at a point where the TV programme had come out, and all the claims had essentially come through, where they were raising claims and trying to seek personal injury compensation for what had happened to them. And so my job was essentially to sift through the personal injury claims. Sorry, my dog's come in to say hello. And basically go through and work up where the claims may be a yes, where they may be a no, but working in conjunction also with like the NHS and the BBC, because there was a crossover with a lot of them. And at that point, and it's all public knowledge in terms of the cases that came out, but the funds were due to go through to a charitable trust, and the trustees of that trust, I believe, were the close friends of Jimmy Savile. So they launched a range of challenges, which is where we were at that point. We had to get a scheme approved for how we would deal with the personal injury claims, but B, we had to then deal with a challenge to whether NatWest should remain as the executor. And there were a lot of things that had to go through in that process. I think they challenged a large amount of the work that was going on, which invariably added to the costs that were involved. And I think there was even an application involved about who would pay the costs. So it was a lot of work and a lot of different parties, but that was my first experience in contentious probate, baptism by fire, I would say. But actually it led me to realise that that's where I wanted to work and the area of work I wanted to go into.
God, what a case to get. I mean, on what grounds were they challenging NatWest? I mean, I think sort of a big sort of relative, faceless bank. I presume they were just executing their duties impartially, I would have thought.
Yeah, and it's a difficult one because executors have to be neutral. So essentially they were trying to do that, which is quite difficult for anyone given the circumstances. But I think the trustees wanted to take that role on, mainly because they were friends of. And I think in some respects there was a difficulty of whether or not they believed the allegations that were coming out. And so it was just more of a challenge, I think, over time to all of the actions that were being taken and whether they were appropriate. But in doing so, that also increased the costs that then reduced what was in the pot available to what would be victims. And so it was quite a difficult one to manage all rounds. And I left before the case finalised, but I have kept track of it over time. And the scheme that was set up was then used to go through each of those claims and eventually would have made provision for them. But they had to do that exercise, like I say, with the BBC and then the NHS, because they were crossing over with some of them. It was quite a lot of work. And actually, in terms of the underlying estate itself, it turned out to be insolvent, which then again meant that there were different principles that had to be employed as well. So it wasn't straightforward whatsoever. And that was, like I say, my first exposure to a contentious private client. So really in the deep end. Yeah.
Hey, look, my first job in financial services was mortgage-backed securities during the financial crisis. So I can
Wow.
I can appreciate. I'll tell you what, though, there's nothing like the sort of profile of something like that to really, how to put it, to really focus the mind on what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, no one needs to explain the wider context of why something's important than when you are working on something quite high profile. It's quite in your face all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, what a fascinating start. So, I mean, what I usually should have started with was your side of things. You studied law, so you clearly wanted to be a solicitor, from a young age, because you applied
actually, I was doing my profile for Irwin Mitchell not long ago, and they asked me about what got me into law. And I never thought about being a lawyer, and certainly my family and background never laid itself out there for that, I suppose. It wasn't something I considered. And it's simply because I had no exposure to it as a kid, and no one in my family went to university or anything like that. So when and it's very random how I ended up in Birmingham for university. It's very random how I ended up doing law. So I ended up picking at A-level law as my fourth or fifth topic. It must have been fourth to take, and I ended up falling in love with it. But before that point, I hadn't even contemplated that was something I was going to do. So and once I did that, you have at that point you had the right to go and look at, I think, 6 universities before you picked one. And I'd had 5 in mind. And when you live in Exeter, which is where I'm born and bred, I picked to go to Cardiff and a couple of others, and they were kind of all around. And then I randomly picked to go and have a look at Birmingham. And again, when I got there, I just fell in love with it. So it's just how that's happened. I have no idea. I've been very fortunate. But obviously, in the grand scheme of it, it's worked out. So yeah, it's very, very bizarre.
Exeter's got a good university, probably the best university in the world, I've been told.
If it really wasn't so close to my parents, I probably would have gone. But
Yeah.
you want to go and fly a bit before you come back. But yeah, I mean, Exeter's close enough to Bristol, which is what invariably brought me back to the southwest after Birmingham. But yeah, it's nice to be in the middle of both cities, really.
Yeah, I bet. So do your degree, do your legal practice course,
Yeah.
then your training. And I realized in prep for this that you've worked in a lot of different places and a lot of different law firms, but you did train at Irwin Mitchell.
I did. It's come back like full circle. So I again with training contracts, it wasn't the easiest because I don't have contacts to look to get a training contract. And at the point when I qualified, which I think was at the height of just coming off the recession, so there weren't a lot going around. I think it felt like I got rejected from a lot of law firms, and you have to. It is very hard not to take that personally and to keep going. And so in the first couple of years, I didn't get anywhere and I had to reassess what I was going to do. And I went to go and get a job as an LPC advocate, which is basically being a junior barrister without the title, but you
Mm.
do like small debt recovery matters. And it was off the back of doing that for about a year that and a refocus. So instead of applying for, say, 20 training contracts, I applied for 3 or 4 that I then managed to get 2 in 1 year, and Irwin Mitchell was one of them. But yeah, I trained in Birmingham. I did the business side rather than personal injury. And it was unfortunate when I came to qualify, I didn't have a job in litigation. And so I had to look elsewhere. But it is full circle. They do have new offices in Birmingham. But the firm has definitely changed in the 12 years since I've left. So it's much, much bigger. And I think the focus of the firm is its profile's a lot bigger. And for contentious probate, I think there were a few people doing it back then. But now I think Irwin Mitchell has over 50 people practicing in it. And I think it's one of the biggest, if not biggest, in the country. So just goes to show that things can change very quickly.
Yeah,
So
it can. We're lucky. I know quite a few of the team at Irwin Mitchell there, and they're always you're always very generous in sort of coming to our events and supporting our events. I'm always quite grateful. But it's a lovely team. Certainly, everyone that I've met seems very pleasant, and I'm sure it's a nice place to work.
yeah, I think the opportunity there, their profile is such that they attract an amazing amount of work, but they also attract great work as well. So lots of my colleagues, because there's so many of them, they've got cases going on in all different directions within our field. And it's just like this year they took me to Budapest to go to Contra event. And it's just the profile of what you get exposed to is a lot bigger than I have been before. The work is, I would say, second to none. And in terms of colleagues, it's like coming back in to work with friends and family, really. The Bristol office, I think I'm one of the first private client people to come into it, but the team's going to expand in September. We've got 2 new people coming. And so the profile really is we're looking to expand into Bristol, Southwest, the Cotswolds. And Bristol is a great city. It's just a great place to be for IM as well. It's just getting that profile up to show that we're there and doing the work. So,
Well, it sounds like it's going great guns. Budapest is a good city. I was seconded there in my previous job for 6 months, and
yeah.
it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great city. I was only there for 3 or 4 days, but I enjoyed everything I saw. It, 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 I think they're going to Rome next year, so they bob through all the different countries, but it's definitely a really good conference, that one, the Contra one as well.
So you do the LPC, you're trying to get a training contract and struggling, which, by the way, seems to be a very, very common thing to happen, particularly those who are qualified during those years post financial crisis. I was saying in one of the previous podcasts that we released about how there is so much of a luck of a draw of what is the economy doing when you graduate, and it really has a huge effect on that process. But this is something that comes up time and time again. People study law, they do their LPC, and then struggle with training contracts. Has that improved? Is there still that bun fight to get into a law firm and get the training contract, or is it still as difficult as it was when you did it?
It's a really good question. I'm not in touch with as many people trying to come through, and I'm more than happy if there are people out there and I can help to help how I can. I suspect there's still a bottleneck, to be honest with you, although I'm not au fait on the details. And I think it's mainly down to the fact that there are lots and lots of law students, and there will be a backlog each year as well. And there's only so many training contract spaces. And it depends on you and your preference, whether you want to go and work for a big London law firm and how many spaces they have there, or whether it's more of a regional base. There will be less people, well, I suppose less opportunity. So I suspect the issue is still there. The irony is, once you get through that, depending on what you want to do and your specialism, for example, private client, there is a lack of private client lawyers, and that's both across the kind of non-contentious, so the people on the other side of the fence, and the contentious. So when you get in and you can specialize, the kind of world's your oyster at the moment, in the sense that there are lots of opportunities out there. So it's just getting through that hard bit, really. And I'm not sure whether there's much. I know they've changed the whole process. It's called the exam process is no longer the LPC. And there are more opportunities, like being an apprentice, for example, which is something Irwin Mitchell has got a program running for. So there are different ways into the profession. Hopefully that will alleviate it. But certainly I had to pay for my LPC. I then had to work probably 2 or 3 like part-time jobs, and then also had to apply for training contracts. So there was never a dull moment back in the day. So
yeah, it's brutal. So you did manage to get the training contract. That was at Irwin Mitchell. You did.
Yeah.
It was a four-seat training contract: insolvency, employment, court of protection, and corporate restructuring. Is that right?
So I think it was I did nearly 18 months between insolvency and commercial litigation. I did a whole seat in what would be a crossover between court of protection, wills, trust, and probate, and then I did a separate seat in employment. So I think I knew very quickly that I didn't want to do the non-contentious side of private client. Employment
Is that
was
because it's,
interesting.
is it not spicy enough?
My colleagues that sit there, I think they love what they do, and I have no issue with that whatsoever. But I knew very quickly that I wanted to do litigation. There's no way around that, really. So it's not because I like to argue in my personal life, though I'm sure some people will tell me that I do. But actually, the reality is, if you've got that litigation love, you're not going to step away from it. And it was just kind of finding the right area to go into at that point, really.
Okay, so you figured out. So you had that stint at Eversheds, got a taste of what you didn't fancy doing. Osborne Clark, that big Jimmy Savile case, but a taste of contentious probate. And was it contentious probate from then on in?
Yeah, and I left Osborne Clark mainly because they moved away. They actually got rid of their private client services, which was fairly unfortunate timing. So I was only there for just under a year. And then I kind of stepped over to work at Stone King, which is actually where I worked for a range of private clients, but I also worked for charities, and they've got a big base for that, and they're very well known for it. But actually working on it for contentious probate matters. So charities get left a lot of legacies in wills, and often they are challenged by disgruntled beneficiaries. So usually family members who feel they should receive the money over a charity. And that again gave me a different side to contentious probate, actually a really good one. We worked for the likes of cancer research, Alzheimer's research, the Donkey Sanctuary, for example. So there's a whole range of stuff going on. But it was fascinating for me because I have to say, people do challenge it depending on the different type of charity more. So animal charities, for example, will I suspect, get challenged more than, say, a cancer research or a cancer charity would do. But they rely on it. It's their bread and butter for what they do and how they help a large amount of the time. So it's quite a different perspective.
Why does the donkey sanctuary keep coming up? I've heard that reference so many times when it comes to wills, but donkeys are not something you encounter in day-to-day life very often.
And when I was practicing with charities a while ago, it was interesting because Donkey Sanctuary was probably up in the top. I think they probably are in the top 10 for getting legacies, and they're very, very good at attracting people to give them legacies. So they receive a massive amount, and I think they probably are used an example 9 times out of 10 because of that. So
must be a Winnie the Pooh related things. It's a something in childhood maybe. Awesome. Thanks for going through that. It is really interesting, and you have had a really interesting variety of things you've worked on. One other thing, to what extent do you get involved with other private client professionals? Because obviously that's the world I'm in. I'm a financial advisor, and obviously I
Yeah.
run a networking group to bring together lots of different private client people or private client facing people. Do you interact much with your sort of adjacent professions?
Yeah, and I think for me, and this is probably the same with a lot of contentious lawyers, especially in probate, there is no right place, right time, because that's not how we work. So you're not supposed to be sat there waiting for someone to effectively pass away or for a dispute to come up. It's actually being with the right professionals and the right network that will then refer it into you as and when something happens, because ultimately we'd rather a dispute doesn't happen. So actually your network tends to be tax advisors, financial advisors, it can be will writers, it can be just a network of friends and family, because obviously at the end of the day that happens in day-to-day lives, unfortunately. But it's just having that right network. And I go to a lot of events that typically you may not have a connection as to why you're there or what you're doing, but actually it's just about making sure that you are available if needed. And so getting your name around, making sure you're there if people have questions. I tend to, and Irwin Mitchell do a new inquiry process where they will help for a period of time, like as in a 30-minute consultation, to see how they could help or what the issues are. And so that kind of helps to drive people through. But having your network, especially in Bristol and the Southwest, so that somebody on the ground can go and see them. A lot of the people who want to see us are ones that will want to see you in person sometimes, and so that's important, making sure you're on the ground. But yeah, Bristol's quite a big network of people. There's a lot of private client networks and individuals, and I think meeting people in the same network, so mortgage advisors as well.
Oh,
You never
interesting.
know, really. So it's just they can come from anywhere and everywhere, really. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Bristol does punch above its weight in certain respects in terms of professional services. There's a huge amount of private client professionals in Bristol, but also accountancy, banking, law firms all seem to be very, very well represented here. That's sort of my experience of it anyway. Before I let you go, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. So that there is, social media influencers and LinkedIn influencers is something that is becoming more and more publicized. You see more people in the professions really putting themselves out there on social media, but LinkedIn in particular, depending on where their firm falls in terms of allowing individuals to post without too much oversight and scrutiny. You've got a really decent following on LinkedIn. I think I said just before the call, you've got 6,000 followers. Is that something that you actively tried to get, or were you posting on LinkedIn and that came through sort of relatively naturally?
so I think for me, LinkedIn has always been about using it to really network professionally. So it's just an add-on to the day-to-day face to networking, really. I tend to post a lot about the cases within my area of work, and then people will tend to network around that in the sense that they will comment on it and kind of feeds into that. I really just focus on like I said before the call, I really focus on my area of work. If there's a case that comes up, usually with a Daily Mail article that will come with it, and make some comment on it and see if I can generate some conversation. That seems to have come over time. Like, it's not something I've generated overnight, but in the last year alone, I think it's really taken up. I've probably got more followers in the last 12 months than I did in the kind of years before it. But actually it tends to be organically, not something I've put a massive amount of effort into. And actually, in the last 12 months, I've made more of an effort to post weekly, monthly, and on topics that I think are relevant. I tend to look at things slightly different. So I'm posting something that's not all over social media, rather, so you get something a different take, or whether it's a different case. I also post about cases in other jurisdictions, because it's very clear this is not just an issue to Britain, it's an issue that will happen worldwide. So yeah, recently it's been more of a kind of uptake and a bit of effort, and that's where I've got my followers, but it's not something I've actively invested in
And and
historically. So
does that follow through to referrals and business? So you have you actually got do you get referrals through LinkedIn?
Yeah, and there was one post that I made from a Daily Mail article earlier this year on a case that had come out, and I really thought nothing on it of it at all. And I said to you before the call, it generated nearly like 8 million likes, and I've never had such a take up, and I don't think I will do again. It was so weird and wonderful. It went to India, it went to China. I don't
Wow.
have any idea how. And I got quite a few followers off the back of that, but I also got probably like 3 or 4 referrals and off of it through direct messages to me off on LinkedIn, which then converted into work. And I've never had that before, but I get the impression that happens to other people that are networking. So I think it goes to show that actually on any given time, you can't predict where your work's going to come from. But if you make the right post and it happens to land on someone's desk, they will probably get in contact if they think, yes, she's done that. But equally, my friend said to me, my mum was looking at your LinkedIn profile the other day and she was asking me about this inheritance issue and she's going to give you a belt. So you never quite know who's going to be looking or where you're going to get that opportunity. But just being there and keeping the kind of right profile does help. I think it helps support what you've already got.
So true. And I think if people do go looking for you and you know, it's starting with a Google search and they do come across a LinkedIn profile that is well populated with work you do, your opinions on things, I think it really helps people to get a sense of what you do and what you're about even before they get in touch with you, versus if you don't have any presence at all. I mean, there's potentially not much to go on. So it's not surprising to me at all that has turned into sort of leads and referrals. Is there something you'd encourage, I don't know, people coming through the ranks to try and do?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is there can be too much posting, and that's probably something I think you need to be targeted in what you do rather than just kind of dot it around. So I think it's really important to have a good profile to keep it updated, but to also target what you do. Otherwise, you run the risk of maybe frustrating or annoying people, and at that point, that isn't a good thing. So that's the one observation I would make. And I certainly think the people that use it well, especially across the contentious probate, people do come up and see you at events and they will say and note you before. I've met people who have come over to say hello to me and I have no idea who they are. But they have known and seen me through posts, and it's really lovely because it actually opens up doors and opportunities to speak to people. Yeah, it's bizarre really at the end of the day what technology can do. That being said, I don't use Twitter and I don't use Facebook for other than for personal reasons, and I much prefer limiting it to that one, so you only have one avenue through which to then update and then promote. Otherwise, you get inundated, I think. So.
Oddly, I'm exactly the same. I use LinkedIn an awful lot. I don't use Twitter at all. I'm on Facebook, but again, don't particularly use it. And I don't know, I quite like LinkedIn as a space to talk about. It's a place for work. You can talk about it unashamedly and maybe in slightly more detail than might be appropriate for a normal social media post. So yeah, I fall in exactly the same place on that.
Yeah.
That is everything that I was going to ask about. Thank you so much for your time. It's very much appreciated. It's been really good to have you on, and hopefully see you at one of our events in the not too distant future.
Thank you for having me.